Situação: 12 tribos de Israel em um campo mortal. Missão: unificar a nação, conquistar Jerusalém e proteger as fronteiras em 1000 a.C. Execução: infantaria e guerrilheiros. Comando e controle: Rei Davi. Os Conquistadores. O Rei Davi.
Welcome to Conquerors. I'm Captain Dale Dye. Most of what we think we know about King David's military career comes from the Bible. It's a story where the truth lies somewhere between faith and fact. Indeed, most historians and archaeologists are reluctant to speculate about what the real story is. And yet there is a window that allows us a look into the world of the 10th century BC, the time we believe King David lived and reigned. The Bible tells us that this was his weapon of choice. History tells us it was the weapon of choice of many ancient warriors. The sling was lightweight, ammunition was clearly easy to find, and it allowed a warrior to attack his enemy while keeping his own distance. Used properly, the sling could be deadly. And it may well have been the weapon which catapulted King David into the pages of history.
Nós o conhecemos melhor como o guerreiro que derrotou Golias, o verdadeiro conquistador de Jerusalém e unificador de Israel. Mas o que sabemos sobre o homem, o colecionador de esposas, o líder carismático? Celebrado por artistas durante séculos, Davi foi mais um mito do que um homem. Mas sua reputação ficou mais concreta em 1993, quando os arqueólogos fizeram uma descoberta extraordinária. Eles encontraram a tábua de pedra em Israel que carrega a inscrição da casa de Davi. Ela data de quase 3.000 anos.
This suggests to some scholars and archaeologists that David was a real historical figure and that the exploits that are described in the Bible are, at their core, a matter of history and not a matter of myth.
Most archaeologists agree today that King David is a historical figure, that he was a charismatic leader, and it created something much bigger, more complex than was before him. Although the debate as to the extent is still going on.
A história de Davi se passa no Oriente Médio há 3.000 anos. O Egito e a Babilônia eram as duas civilizações dominantes na região. Entre elas, havia um país mediterrâneo chamado Canaã, povoado por canaanitas, filisteus e israelitas. Todos competiam pelo mesmo território. Estavam em guerra constante. Os israelitas da época de Davi consistiam em 12 tribos que ocupavam regiões diferentes de Canaã. Embora essas tribos guerreassem entre si, elas eram unidas pelo judaísmo e por tradições em comum. Para sobreviver, eram solidárias quando os filisteus invasores tentavam expulsá-los.
They are electing leaders who will protect them from the incursions of other local neighbors. The Philistines come from the Aegean. They have a warlike culture. They are aggressive. So after settling the coast, they are interested in beginning to move up into the central mountains.
As montanhas centrais de Canaã eram povoadas pelas tribos de Benjamim e Judá. De acordo com a Bíblia, ambas as tribos haviam sido eleitas pelo rei Saul. Ele ordenara que as tribos lidassem com a ameaça filisteia.
And although Saul was successful now and then against the Philistines, he never had full tribal support. He was never able to really field an army under his control. He depended on volunteers. And the only volunteers that would usually join him were from the local tribes that were being attacked by their neighbors.
The Bible says that during one particular battle, Saul's forces and the forces of the Philistines had positioned themselves on opposing hills. Some people say that This is the hill where the Philistine army was positioned. Down below, the Valley of Elah.
The Valley of Elah itself is a very strategic way leading from the coastal plain, from Philistia, into the heartland of Judah.
É possível que as duas forças tenham se encontrado bem aqui durante a batalha.
Estavam os filisteus em um monte do lado da Lém e os israelitas no outro monte do lado da Quem, e entre eles o vale. Samuel 1, 17:3.
The physical background, the geographical background of the battle, it's very credible. There's a description of the land which fits in very well with what we know of these places.
O antigo método de guerra que a Bíblia descreve também é plausível. Historicamente, alguns generais, diante da perspectiva de uma batalha grande e custosa, preferiam um único embate a uma luta maior. Eles enviavam seus melhores guerreiros e estabeleciam uma prova, como uma luta de boxe dos dias atuais. Esse é o contexto da famosa batalha entre Davi e Golias.
I personally find the story plausible because it reflects Israelites engaging Philistines in warfare according to battle conventions that were familiar to the Philistines.
Embora a batalha épica entre Davi e Golias seja plausível do ponto de vista histórico, não há provas de que isso realmente tenha acontecido.
It's not something that we can find as archaeologists. It's very difficult to identify small events, especially something like that.
Mas a história persiste, talvez porque seja tão convincente. O melhor guerreiro filisteu era Golias, descrito como um gigante de armadura que empunhava uma espada ameaçadora e que zombava dos inimigos.
It was a kind of psychological warfare that a powerful warrior might try to belittle his enemy and demoralize his enemy.
Os israelitas precisavam encontrar um voluntário entre as tropas que pudesse enfrentar Golias, mas não tinham opção.
According to the biblical narrative, we saw that this battle should have really meant who is going to rule. Because if the Philistines would have won this battle, it meant that the kingdom of Israel should be subjugated to Philistia.
A Bíblia afirma que um jovem pastor se ofereceu para enfrentar Golias. O nome dele era Davi. Ele era membro da tribo de Judá e o mais novo de 7 filhos, criado por um pastor de ovelhas de Hebron.
Like many great men in history, David appeared to have come from a commonplace background. But he distinguished himself by stepping out of the ranks of this large but unremarkable family and injecting himself into history.
Davi utilizou uma arma que servia para 2 propósitos. Como pastor, a funda era útil para afastar os lobos, mas para um soldado era outra história.
The sling is a primitive but very effective weapon. It was simply a piece of braided wool like this that shepherds would get from their flocks, or a piece of plated rawhide like this with a pouch sewn in the center. It allowed a skilled slinger to stand outside the range of his enemy's projectile weapons and still get the job done on his enemy. Now, it could be used in 2 ways, essentially. A slinger could use a large projectile like this one and load it into the pouch, in which case his sling, used in this manner, and launch the weapon up and over into his enemy's ranks. Or using a smaller projectile like this and an overhead motion with the sling. Suddenly, his sling became a flat trajectory, high-velocity weapon like a sniper rifle. Now, that kind of thing could do some serious damage.
Mas havia outra vantagem. A funda era uma arma que Davi podia esconder facilmente até o momento de usá-la, o que lhe dava um elemento surpresa contra seu oponente, que era maior e melhor armado. Quando chegou à distância de alcance, Davi revelou a funda e lançou uma pedra fatal. Como uma bala, ela foi impulsionada no ar, e quando atingiu o alvo, o centro da testa de Golias, o poderoso gigante caiu. Imediatamente Davi se aproximou dele, arrancou sua espada e o decapitou. Quando Davi segurou a cabeça do inimigo para todos verem, o efeito psicológico sobre os filisteus foi devastador e eles fugiram aterrorizados. Davi era um improvável campeão, mas era o homem certo no lugar certo, na hora certa, e se tornou um herói.
I think this kind of sets the stage for David's entire career. That is, he's not a great warrior in the sense of power or strength, but he's smart. He's very intelligent.
The consequence of the victory of David and the Israelites was that the Philistines were expelled from the territory of the Israelites in the highlands back to their own territory.
Segundo a Bíblia, depois de derrotar Golias, Davi se juntou ao exército do rei Saul. Com seu carisma e liderança naturais, Davi chegou ao posto de capitão de 1000, pois comandava um regimento. O texto bíblico não dá informações sobre seu treinamento, mas podemos imaginar como ele aprendeu rapidamente a manejar as armas, inclusive a espada e a lança. Em pouco tempo, Davi se tornou um poderoso guerreiro. Ironicamente, o sucesso de Davi o atrapalhou. Seu poder fazia com que Saul o considerasse uma ameaça.
Saul becomes so paranoid with David's success that he actually sends people to kill him. David escapes from the palace. He goes into the hill country south of Hebron, which is like the American Badland.
Davi agora era um proscrito e vivia em fuga. Ele lutava para sobreviver e tinha um plano de longo prazo. Uma série de movimentos calculados prepararia o terreno para o momento em que ele alcançaria o poder absoluto.
When David fled Saul's palace, he escaped certain death at the hands of assassins sent by a jealous king. Of course, his immediate concern was survival, but David was also a long-range planner. He began to formulate a scheme to grab absolute power among the Israelites. To do that, David needed an army.
Once David becomes an outlaw, other people from different parts of Israel, from among the tribes, who are dissatisfied with Saul, are attracted to David. And in effect, David becomes a warlord in this mountainous area, slightly beyond the reach of Saul's organized army, but in an area where there are other tribes that are hostile to Israel.
Davi e seus soldados viviam em cavernas e se tornaram especialistas em guerrilha. Estavam em constante movimento para não serem capturados ou derrotados.
He perfected the art of fighting with a small group of armed men, moving quickly, hitting and running. He went abroad in the countryside and attacked towns and settlements.
O exército de Davi era pequeno, com cerca de 600 homens, e suas táticas eram brutais. Nesse tipo de guerrilha, as regras de combate eram simples. Não havia regras. Ele lutava por sua vida, defendia-se dos soldados enviados por Saul. Portanto, ele se sentia livre da moralidade e dos escrúpulos.
It's a matter of tit for tat. The conventions of warfare are such that if you come and kill without discrimination, then the same thing will be done to you. There was no turning the other cheek.
Davi era um estrategista militar inteligente e elaborou um plano que à primeira vista parecia uma missão suicida. Ele entrou na Filisteia à procura de uma audiência com o inimigo israelita, o rei de Gate.
The Philistines had 5 major cities. Along the coast you had, going from the north to the south, Ashdod, Ashkelon, and Gaza. And then inland you had Ekron and Gat. These 5 cities are known archaeologically. 4 of them have been excavated rather extensively.
Estas são as ruínas de Gate, a cidade filisteia que foi comandada pelo rei Aquis.
Dispôs-se Davi, e com os 600 homens que com ele estavam, passou a Aquis, filho de Maoque, rei de Gate. Samuel 1, 27:2.
Davi acreditava no provérbio que dizia que o inimigo de seu inimigo era seu amigo. Como Aquis era inimigo de Saul, Davi precisava dele. Então ele se arriscou e foi ao palácio fazer um acordo.
Saul's aggression against David is so great that David decides to seek protection from Saul's enemies, the Philistines. And he convinces one of the Philistine kings that he will be a loyal vassal.
O rei Aquis acreditava que Davi atacaria inimigos em comum, os povos governados pelo rei Saul, mas Davi tinha um plano diferente.
What the text says he's really doing is that he's attacking other peoples in the area, those who are loyal to the Philistines, and he plunders everything. And the reason why nobody ever finds this out is that David kills every human, men, women, children. So no one ever lives to tell the story.
David is capable of acts of extraordinary violence and bloodshed. He's not a kind and gentle figure.
When he brings the booty back to Philistine king, the king asks him, "Where have you been?" David says, "Oh, I raided this city in Judah, I raided that city in Judah." The king is content because David is not only serving his interests, but he is also enriching the Philistines. By making himself the enemy of his own tribesmen, the king knows or believes that David is going to be his vassal forever.
Mas, na verdade, Davi estava longe de ser inimigo do próprio povo.
What he does is that he fights all kinds of nomads that are molesting the people of Judah and helping them. And by this, actually, he got the support of the people of Judah.
Davi não conseguiu evitar que os filisteus atacassem Judá.
The Philistines are very successful in their aggression against the tribes of Israel. They're so successful that it reaches a point where there is going to be a single battle that's going to determine who controls the Central Mountains.
Mais uma vez, é a Bíblia que reconta a história. Após inúmeras batalhas, Saul reuniu suas forças no Monte Gilboa, ao norte. Os filisteus reuniram suas forças e aliados para combater Saul. No início, parecia que Davi iria participar.
David comes up with King Achish of Gath because David is a vassal of that king. The Philistine lords look at him and say, "Why are you bringing him? He's one of them." And so King Achish sends him home.
O exército filisteu enfrentou as forças de Saul e as derrotou. O exército de Saul se retirou para uma encosta do Monte Gilboa. Os arqueiros filisteus os perseguiram em suas bigas.
One of the Philistines' favorite weapons was the horse-drawn chariot. Now, this kind of primitive tank was relatively useless on uneven terrain or rough ground. But give the Philistines a flat field, and they could use the mobility of a chariot like this to attack Saul's army in the flanks or even in the rear.
Os arqueiros montados em bigas perseguiam Saul e se moviam facilmente na encosta oriental da montanha. Eles dispararam suas flechas contra os israelitas, que estavam presos no platô. A manobra funcionou. O exército de Saul fora derrotado. Quando Saul percebeu que tudo estava perdido, ele se suicidou. Com a morte de Saul, Davi podia voltar a Hebrom e se reunir aos homens da tribo de Judá. Como os grandes conquistadores, ele sabia que podia contar com o poder de sua espada. A caminho de casa, ele atacou os amalequitas, inimigos de sua tribo. Ele levou vários escravos e muito ouro para a acolhedora tribo de Judá.
So it's no coincidence that then shortly down the road, when David is looking to become king of Judah, David's the top candidate, not only for what he's able to do militarily, but also, you know, he's kind of been buying votes, we might say.
Após a morte de Saul, Davi se tornou o rei de Judá. Mas para se tornar o rei das 12 tribos, ele teria que combater o legado de Saul.
Saul has a son who escapes death. His firstborn son, Jonathan, was killed but another son establishes the seat of his kingship in Transjordan, at a place called Mahanaim.
Uma guerra ao estilo da máfia eclodiu. Após 2 anos no poder, o filho de Saul foi assassinado junto com seu general, Abner.
And you have a kind of a pattern that emerges. You have one enemy after another who dies, usually violently, and David benefits, but David is always depicted in the Bible as innocent, as having nothing to do with these deaths.
What happens now is that there is no king in the north. And the northern tribes come to Hebron, and they ask David to become their king. They say to him, "We know that when you were in the service of Saul, you went out to battle. It was you who kept us free. It was you who kept us safe." And they elect him king.
Davi não era só o rei de Judá, era o rei das 12 tribos de Israel. Era o primeiro da história israelita.
David is intelligent. He is a great military strategist. He's also ruthless. And it's that combination that make him such a great conqueror, so successful.
As king and protector of all of the Israelites, David had unified his people, but that brought new problems. He needed a more suitable capital than Hebron, a capital that would be acceptable to all of the tribes and still compatible with his long-range goals. After a lot of thought, he settled on Jerusalem. But before he could make Jerusalem his capital, he had to capture it. After King David had joined the 12 tribes of Israel into what historians now call the United Monarchy, he really had his work cut out for him. You see, King David ruled at a time and a place where the very idea of nationhood was eerie and threatening to the Israelites. They were simply a band of unruly, warring tribes, and to them, the thought of a single monarchy was not only an abstraction, it was objectionable.
The Israelites were unable to live in peace with each other, and they had no sense of being part of a nation, or for that matter, being the center of an empire.
Davi pretendia construir uma nação moderna com as tribos hostis. Ele sabia que precisava de uma cidade de onde governar. Ela precisava ter localização central e ser facilmente defendida. Ele escolheu a cidade de Jebus, mais tarde conhecida como Jerusalém.
He decides to install himself in the hill town of Jerusalem, not a traditional Israelite town, a town that belongs to completely different people.
Os Jebusitas eram um grupo de canaanitas que povoaram Canaã por séculos. Davi decidiu conquistá-los e tomar sua cidade como prêmio. Ele escolheu Jerusalém porque fora o lar de povos que não tinham ligação com nenhuma das 12 tribos. Isso facilitaria a aceitação da nova capital pelos israelitas.
David uses Jerusalem in the way, for instance, the colonies used the District of Columbia as a neutral capital that didn't belong to any of the original 13 colonies.
Davi também acreditava que a cidade podia ser conquistada.
On the basis of archaeological evidence that we have available, Jerusalem was weakly fortified around 1000 BCE. What they had available were fortifications that had been built, in some cases, 600 years earlier. The people of Jerusalem, the Jebusites, were not the enemies of any tribe. They had never attacked Israel. We know nothing about them. So David had no interest in killing these people. He was interested in the real estate and in controlling this area. He sends his general, his cousin Joab. Joab examines the possibilities.
Partiu o rei com seus homens para Jerusalém contra os jebusitas que habitavam naquela terra. Samuel 2, 5, 6.
O único registro escrito que conta como Davi conquistou a cidade legendária está na Bíblia. Mas a descrição gera mais confusão do que esclarecimento.
There are several theories of how David conquered Jerusalem. In the Bible, there's a very, very hazy or even nebulous description of something to do with touching the Tzinor, whatever that is. One suggestion was that it was some poorly understood cultic aspect in which there was some sort of a curse on the city or something of the sort.
Outra interpretação é que Tzinor se referia a um tipo de tubulação. No século XIX, o arqueólogo Charles Warren descobriu um sistema de água subterrâneo com um poço entalhado no granito sólido que ia do rio Gion à cidade. Tendo por base a descoberta de Warren, acredita-se que o poço foi a rota que o general de Davi, Joabe, usou para entrar em segredo na cidade.
According to that, David's soldiers climbed up this water shaft and made a surprise entry into the city and captured the city. This, though, is problematic since nowadays, archaeologically, it seems to be that the Warren shaft was not in use and could not have been in use at that time.
Mas alguns anos atrás, outro caminho subterrâneo foi descoberto. Os arqueólogos acreditam que seja da época de Davi, e essa pode ser a tubulação citada na Bíblia.
The discoveries found out that there was an earlier water system, dated to about 1800 BC. This water system was part of a Canaanite city, a very impressive and well-fortified city, and it was constructed 800 years before David was supposed to have been active.
Os especialistas concordam que esse é o cenário mais plausível.
Theoretically, there is a water system through which Joab or David or anyone could enter the city in the 10th century. All I can say it is possible, or it is not impossible, that Joab went through this system.
Historians aren't sure exactly how David conquered Jerusalem, but the results speak for themselves. Ultimately, he became the king of Jerusalem, and that city became the political and spiritual heart of his kingdom.
All the ancient remains in Jerusalem are located in this shallow mound or ridge. From the early Bronze Age onward, this is where Jerusalem was. So archaeologically speaking, there is almost a consensus that this is the city of David. This is Jerusalem of the Bronze and Iron Ages.
A cidade de Davi ocupa uma pequena parte do que conhecemos hoje como a moderna Jerusalém. O rei Davi planejou e executou sua estratégia de reunir as 12 tribos e conquistar novos territórios para proteger as fronteiras. Davi era agora motivo de preocupação para os filisteus, antigos inimigos de Israel. De acordo com a Bíblia, os dois lados se enfrentaram 2 vezes nas cercanias de Jerusalém. Em ambas as batalhas, Davi foi vitorioso. Ao afastar os filisteus, Davi alcançou 2 vitórias importantes. Ele provou aos filisteus que podia resistir a eles e provou às 12 tribos que podiam trabalhar juntas como uma nação. Davi começava a construir e expandir seu império. Para fazer isso, ele utilizou um símbolo poderoso, a Arca da Aliança. Era a arca que carregara os 10 mandamentos quando os israelitas vagaram pelo deserto. Depois que os filisteus se retiraram da cidade em que a arca estava guardada, Davi tomou de volta e a utilizou como um símbolo poderoso, um testamento vivo de seu poder. Davi transformou Jerusalém numa cidade santa, pela qual as pessoas dariam suas vidas para protegê-la. Com essa conquista, Davi garantiu a expansão do império.
He could also read the situation in an international level and see that at the time that he was rising, there was a bit of a vacuum in the ancient Near East. So that enabled him to expand his kingdom. And that fits in with the description that we have in the Bible.
Para alcançar seus objetivos, Davi montou um exército poderoso com tropas de elite, milícias vindas das 12 tribos e mercenários, formados principalmente por seus antigos camaradas filisteus. Ironicamente, ele confiava mais nos filisteus porque não eram leais a nenhuma tribo em particular. A próxima missão do rei Davi era conquistar os territórios próximos à sua esfera de influência. Ao fazer isso, ele ergueu um império para seu povo.
After King David established his seat of power in Jerusalem, he set out on a series of conquests designed to protect Israel from threats outside and inside. The ancient ruins of Megiddo, not far from the northern border of Israel, are a case in point.
Most archaeologists agree that it is likely that David was responsible for the destruction of Megiddo, and that later, after it was destroyed, it was incorporated and became an important center of the United Monarchy.
No centro de Tel Aviv, é possível encontrar evidências das conquistas de Davi. Esta é a escavação de Tel Quassil, de um acampamento filisteu. Os arqueólogos acreditam que não faz parte de uma grande cidade. No entanto, é outro exemplo da campanha de Davi para construir um império, apesar de modesto.
David's so-called empire is not a vast ancient Near Eastern empire. It's nothing like the empire of the Egyptians or the empire of the Assyrians from ancient Mesopotamia. David's nation in Israel itself is really very small, something like 100 miles long north to south, like 30 miles wide east to west. So it's a very small country.
Mas era um império que Davi e as 12 tribos de Israel protegiam a qualquer preço.
David, according to the stories in 2 Samuel, does conquer some of the surrounding peoples, the Moabites on the other side of the Dead Sea, the Edomites south of the Moabites, some of the city-states of Syria, ancient Aram, north of Moab. But there's no real indication that David exercises any kind of continuing control over these areas, over these provinces. These may well be simply one-time defeats.
Há pouca prova arquitetônica do controle imperial sobre essas regiões, pois não há ruínas de torres nem de construções. Embora não haja registro de como Davi venceu várias batalhas, as forças militares de Davi provavelmente usavam os armamentos e táticas da época.
In King David's day, opposing forces faced each other on the battlefield in long lines of battle. As they approached to the clash, various weapons were employed, and they were employed in series, usually depending on their range. The first to be employed would be bows and arrows. Archers would fire their arrows into the enemy formation. As things got closer, spears were next, long-edged weapons like this one, or longer, that would hopefully extend the individual soldier's reach beyond the reach of his enemy's weapon. Things get closer, it's time for swords. These were edged weapons, usually made of bronze or iron, with a thick fuller running the length of the blade to give it strength and slashing power. When things got really tight, daggers were employed. Now, you get this in the enemy's guts, or you die.
Unfortunately, we do not have a lot of information from the biblical text about David's battles, except of his accomplishments and the territories that he added to the Israelite territory. There is one instance that it is mentioned, he split his army into two. He actually did a kind of a maneuver in order to deceive the enemy, surprise him, to flank him.
As atividades expansionistas de Davi eram amplas e frequentes. Foi durante esse período que ocorreu a famosa história bíblica de Davi e Betsabeia. A conquista aconteceu no quarto, não de campo de batalha. Mas foi um momento decisivo para as façanhas militares e políticas de Davi.
David at this point controls an empire. And it is not really fitting for him to actually function as the commander-in-chief in the field. He has generals to do that. And even though he would like to go and do, he is counseled, stay in Jerusalem.
Em uma noite quente e insone, Davi saiu na varanda do palácio. Ele olhou para a cidade e avistou uma linda mulher que se banhava no terraço.
We could speculate that she intended that the king see her bathing so as to capture his eye, and that's precisely what happened. And we see how David used the power that he had won for himself in battle and by political intrigue. He was now the king of all Israel, and if he beheld a woman that he desired, he simply summoned her. This is, again, what the Bible tells us.
E mandou Davi indagar quem era aquela mulher. Samuel 2, 11:3.
He's told that she is the wife of a man named Uriah, a Hittite, presumably therefore not Israelite, but somebody who is a mercenary in David's army. And of course, according to the story, David, if he had made the right decision, would have or should have stopped there.
Mas Davi se tornou uma vítima de sua luxúria. Ele perseguiu Betsabeia e, ao fazer isso, traiu o marido dela e seu próprio exército.
This was a married woman, a woman whose husband was at that very moment fighting in the king's army, fighting for the cause of the king. And meanwhile, David was back in the palace taking his pleasure with this good soldier's wife.
Davi dormiu com Betsabeia e a engravidou. Seu relacionamento foi um escândalo, mas Davi tentou encobri-lo ao ordenar que Uriá dormisse com Betsabeia.
David summons Uriah to Jerusalem and says, "Tell me how the battle goes." And Uriah says, "The battle goes well." And now David says, "Go to your house and sleep with your wife." The next morning, David discovers that Uriah didn't go to his house.
Respondeu Urias a Davi: E hei de entrar em minha casa para comer, beber e me deitar com minha mulher? Samuel 2, 11:11.
He said, "How can I go to my house when the troops of Israel are out in the field, when these are my colleagues? I can't have these comforts." David tries to get him drunk and sends him home again, but Uriah doesn't go. Finally, David realizes that he has to get rid of Uriah.
Davi enviou um soldado fiel à frente de batalha contra os amonitas. Ele instruiu seu general, Joabe, a deter seus homens para que Uriá ficasse indefeso e fosse convenientemente morto.
These features of David's personality, his calculation, his cunning, but also his personal passion and sometimes his inability to control his personal passions, are very much on display in the biblical account of his life story.
With Uriah dead, Bathsheba entered the palace and became King David's favorite wife. That was the beginning of a personal and political crisis that eventually led to intrigue and civil war that put all of David's achievements in jeopardy. As a king, a military leader, and a conqueror, King David relied on the loyalty of his troops. But when he sent Bathsheba's husband, a loyal soldier, on a calculated suicide mission, his men lost confidence in him, and that led to bloody insurrections. Now, those insurrections were painful to King David, both politically and personally. Why? Well, because most of the insurrections were led by his sons.
You read the story beginning at 2 Samuel 13 about David's dealings with his sons and with his family. And you see David's failings as a father. I think if you read those stories carefully, you see David still as the ruthless conqueror, only now he's not conquering, now he's maintaining his power. And he maintains it against his own sons.
David is a very complex figure. He's a father, not a particularly good one. He's a husband, not a particularly loyal one. He's a warrior, a very good one. In his culture, virtuous acts and humility were not behaviors that were particularly esteemed. So he can be ruthless. This is what one expects from a leader.
O poder de Davi diminuía. Seus filhos queriam se tornar reis e lutavam pelo trono. Embora Davi saísse vitorioso, não foi sem derramamento de sangue. 3 filhos seus foram mortos. Quando ficou óbvio que Davi estava velho e fraco, a intriga cresceu, e foi Betsabeia, a esposa favorita de Davi, quem mais tramou.
Bathsheba slips into the king's bedchamber and makes a remarkable, articulate, compelling, also extremely romantic argument to the king as to why her son, Solomon, should be designated as the heir in favor of Adoniah, the main contender, another wife's son. And there's a very tender scene of David in his final audience with Bathsheba, and we see the stirring of that old passion that in a way had been his downfall.
Betsabeia usou seus recursos femininos e poder de persuasão para convencer Davi a nomear Salomão como seu herdeiro. Mas haveria mais uma virada. Davi fora cruel em vida e não pretendia morrer tranquilamente. Ele morreria como havia vivido.
On his deathbed, David wanted to make sure that Solomon, his son, followed up and settled the scores that he had not yet settled during his lifetime.
He instructs Solomon in who the potential enemies are going to be after David's death. And like that famous scene at the end of The Godfather, where all of the enemies of the Godfather are taken care of, that's exactly what happens at the beginning of the book of Kings. One by one, David's enemies, those who might threaten Solomon, those whom David promised, I will not hurt you, are executed by Solomon. The young boy who then goes on to build the temple is a chip off of the old block.
Nos locais onde Davi contivera rebeliões, Salomão construiu fortalezas e cidades para manter o reino. Mas sua maior conquista não foi militar ou civil. Foi a construção do templo sagrado em Jerusalém. O templo mais tarde foi destruído pelos babilônios, e um segundo templo foi destruído pelos romanos, mas Davi erguera uma bandeira que não seria esquecida.
David's legacy to the people of Israel today lies in the fact that he staked out this city as his own. It became the city of David, but not in the sense that it was his city. It was a city that belonged to no tribe, and therefore it belonged to all of the ancient Israelites. Even after the second temple was destroyed by the Romans, and the city lacked a temple, it maintained its status as the spiritual center of the Jewish people.
Também se tornou um local sagrado para os cristãos. É a cidade onde Jesus pregou e morreu. E para os muçulmanos, Jerusalém é onde Maomé encontrou o caminho para o paraíso.
The site of the temple, then, in human imagination and in human spiritual yearnings, becomes the spiritual center of almost all of Western civilization.
Assim como a cidade de Jerusalém, Davi foi um paradoxo de violência e espiritualidade. A história lembra dele como um homem de guerra, mas foram suas ideias e não suas conquistas que sobreviveram. Seu conceito de uma Israel unificada superou o milênio e inspirou a moderna Israel.
There's a remarkable moment in recent history where the military leadership of the modern state of Israel, on the eve of the Six-Day War in 1967, was considering the threat that the neighboring Arab countries, and especially Egypt, posed to the state of Israel. And there is recorded in history a statement made by one of the generals to the Prime Minister of Israel: you have the greatest army in the Middle East since the time of David. You must use it. And on that argument, Israel decided to strike preemptively and won a mighty victory in the Six-Day War. That moment for me captures and defines the role of David in history.
Although it's been 3,000 years since his brief reign, King David's deeds continue to echo and reverberate. Military genius, a visionary, a man who grabbed every advantage, no matter how small, and turned it into victory. Maybe the world should remember King David, not so much for his skill with a sling, but for his ability to see beyond what was and realize what could be. I'm Captain Dale Dye. Thanks for watching, Conquerors.